Welcome to And Also, a podcast for the rest of the week. My name is John. I'm the lead pastor at Faith Alliance Church, and I'm joined each week by Kirk Steigler. He and I take a deeper dive into the previous week's message, and we look into the concepts and the scripture and the ideas that made up that message and work to apply them into our lives. We don't want to just talk about things that happened on Sunday. We want to talk about things that happen on Sunday that make a difference in our lives on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and through the rest of the week. So join us as we have a dialogue about what really matters in life, a life faithful to Christ, and how we can apply the things that were said in community in order for us to live and lead changed lives in our world. As we begin, this is And Also, I think, we're double digits now, right? Episode 10.
Episode 10.
Episode 10.
Episode X.
In which we are covering the last 2 weeks, which is what we always do. However, the last 2 weeks built into our sermon series origin story, and I preached on Esau, but then it's also covering Mother's Day, in which Robin spoke on Jochebed. Robin, my wife, spoke on Jochebed. So to cover Esau, Jochebed, Mother's Day, we have a hairy, wild, emotionally charged minefield of a buffet before us.
There you go.
I believe that's a good place to start. So
treading lightly.
So based on that, what are you thinking?
So interesting, actually, when you back that story up a little bit for Moses himself, right? So Moses, this person who is used as the means of escape, right? He and his brother Aaron used as the means of escape for the entire tribe of Israel. Not an offspring of Joseph, who had been used to save the tribe of Israel initially, right? That's an interesting little turn, and I'm curious someday to find out God's thoughts on how come and why and who, right? But it's interesting that you would pick this individual to set apart, to put into this very distinct life, right? The other thing that's interesting, and like Robin had mentioned about how leaving a child in the reeds was a way of saying, this child is free to a good home, right? That's interesting. How strange and interesting that that's the custom, and that the daughter of Pharaoh was willing to accept. And then that Pharaoh didn't argue that. So he had declared, kill them all, and then said, but keeps my daughter happy, right?
Yeah,
that was enough.
My daughter says it's okay, so
she's happy with it. The other thing that made me ponder about that, so here's the daughter of Pharaoh going down to take a bath in the Nile, right? So the Nile River, crocodiles and hippopotamuses, and then and all the dead babies, because they had been throwing the babies into the river, right? So ew. But I guess a good place to take a bath. And so coming down to take a bath, what do you know? Daughter of Jochebed, Miriam, right, is there.
Just hanging out. So security's a little lax. The other thing that made me think, I'm like, anybody could just be there and hang out, and that was okay. They got away with it. Well, that's a good question. Culturally, is it like a community center? Like, would it have been the equivalent to, hey, this is where the people gather. This is where, if you're leaving babies in the reeds, and obviously there's a recognition that hopefully someone's going to find them. So apparently it's populated. Maybe it's the only place to really bathe. I mean, it is,
Do you bathe among the reeds, I guess? It sounds like a not safe place to be in water, but I'm no expert.
Well, right. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
I have watched River Monsters a few times. That's not where you want to be hanging out.
Yeah, especially in the reeds. That's where the predators hang out.
Yeah, things are lurking. like
But maybe
babies.
that's I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe it was much more uh, just kind of in a where community just hung out. I don't know. And
Yeah.
so some things like maybe Miriam wouldn't have been given a second thought because it's just one of the kids playing down at the river. And I don't know. It's really interesting.
Yeah. What are the other servant folk who are with the daughter thinking or doing at this time in order to allow her to approach?
Right. Is it just a kid? So yeah, fine, you can come talk to
So
me. Or...
yeah, she just runs up and says, "Hey, I know someone who can take care of that kid for you." Right, right out of the gate, and that's okay. But also interesting, who wrote this part of the story down? It would have to be Moses, right?
Right. That's the question is even in the not even in the Pentateuch, like who's the author. I mean, it's supposed to be Moses, but we really I don't know if any. I'd have to look this up. I don't know if any like actual scholar would definitively say it was Moses, right? I feel like that's a good guess, but that they're not entirely sure. So, or there it was such an oral tradition that Moses maybe did eventually write it all down, and the story of his birth would have been widely circulated by that point. I don't know. It's a good question, though. I mean, maybe he's just,
So to imagine that, so the story of his birth to be widely circulated among the Hebrews, right? As they were called at that time in Egypt, would that have been a popular story? Everybody else, we all lost our sons, but that one makes it, right? Because gets picked up by Pharaoh's daughter. Right. So I don't know, how would that be interpreted?
Well, I wonder,
or rescued, or scandalous. I don't know.
Well, it's actually that's an interesting way to think about it because, so he doesn't do anything till he's about 40.
Right.
He's raised in under Pharaoh's care until he's about 40. Then, as the scripture goes, then, and I know you know this, but just for the benefit of anyone who's listening, then he saves the Hebrew from being killed, and is kind of hated by both the Egyptian.
Saves the Hebrew from being killed by killing the Egyptian.
Right. So the Egyptians hate him.
Make sure that's framed.
Right. Yeah. So the Egyptians hate him. Then it causes the Hebrews more work for him because he did that. And so then the Hebrews hate him, his own people. And so then he escapes in the desert for another 40 years. And so I wonder if, he's older by the time, the burning bush happens in Exodus 3 and so on. And then he comes back. And I wonder if it needed a generation or two for some of some of those emotions to kind of subside before it's like, okay, that's right. We did hate him, or even his birth. Cause you're right. If he was the one boy that was not only saved, but then he grew
living in a palace,
grew up in opulence. Yeah. He's living in a palace. And so I wonder if there needed to be a couple generations removed for the sting of it to be taken out before he could kind of come back and have any credibility. Maybe, like Jesus said, a prophet isn't welcome in his hometown. Maybe not, but maybe an 80-year-old prophet is, because I don't know. But that's, he doesn't have, even by the time he leaves, it's not like he has a great track record. He can't even speak. It's like everything that he is against
he can't
him.
Speak.
What's that?
He believes he can't speak.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's
so
a good point.
Imagine, right? He's a Hebrew young man being raised by his mother as the nurse, right? As the attendant. So she's probably teaching him on the side, and then he's studying the Egyptian culture and language, probably even written language, right? So he understands, although I think the written language was more for the priests and that group, but I think royals also did. But that aside, so he's studying Egyptian culture, being fed Hebrew culture, perhaps considered the lesser, right? Because he was not natural born Egyptian at that point.
True. Yeah.
And so perhaps believed he could not speak well because he was perhaps mocked for having an accent or something like that. After growing up in the palace, being like, you're the one we picked up in the reeds. So that is interesting to me that he then later on, goes to trust Aaron, but we're skipping ahead.
Right.
I'm just that. What an interesting choice of why does anybody get picked along the way? And it's really interesting that he's the guy that gets picked, right, as a baby to be set aside, to be set apart. Aaron had already passed the age threshold, apparently, for the drowning. So that's interesting. He's there.
He would have been older, so they would have been before. Oh, yeah, two and under, so he must have been older. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So that's really interesting set of circumstances to be the survivor, to get the education, and then to have to, exile yourself to a career that you had zero training in, right? Shepherding.
Never spent any time in them. You're right. Yeah.
So you go from palace life, and I mean, maybe he had chores. I don't know. I doubt it. They were servants.
Not, right? Yeah. I mean, other than education, you're right.
Yeah. So whatever they were training in at the palace, and then go to humble yourself to be a shepherd, and the important role that plays as training for later, marching the entire tribe around to try to keep that group organized. It's one thing have you ever seen sheep herding happen? I mean, it's work, man. Yeah, without the dogs, I don't know how people can do it. It's really tricky. Those things go everywhere.
I wonder if after like a few years of walking through the desert with the Israelis, he's like, I preferred sheep. I would have.
Sheep are easy.
He's like, man, I miss those sheep.
Oh, they want manna, they want pheasants, they want water. Work. But that's the later Moses. But,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Robin talking about
baby Moses,
helpless Moses, right? Being helped by his mother.
Yeah.
And that's that part of the story. We kind of just skip ahead a lot, right? There's, the little kids' books. You just see baby put in a basket and happy and immediately picked up and happy, not baby's hungry and crying in the bushes, because that's what would happen. Right. Unless, the water movement is rocking them to sleep. But it's amazing. What a risk to have taken.
Yeah, well, and even more so, I think one of the things I actually really liked about what Robin brought up, and I knew what she was going to speak on. I didn't know fully, was that just talking about what she said about risk, that Jochebed, is named in Hebrews 11 alongside all like Abraham, the Isaacs, Moses, along with, and all these others. But that action of what she did, and she wasn't named, but she was. I think it's a Jochebed in Hebrews 11. But either way, her action, that risk that you mentioned, is named in Hebrews 11 with all of these other big time faith people, and that's an incredible thing, because really what she did was she was able to surrender. Like, she was able to risk by allowing God to care for that baby, and that gets put up there with all the other big names. So I think you're right. Even by virtue of this recording, the temptation is always to skip through and get to Moses's kind of more exciting parts of his life. But according to the scriptures, according to Hebrews 11, it's worthwhile staying with that risk for a while, because it mattered. It mattered, not only allowed Moses to do what he did, but just the act of faith itself in Jochebed's life mattered enough to catch a recording thousands of years later in Hebrews 11. So I think you're right. That risk is a big deal.
Yeah. So that part was interesting. And then Robin spoke of dealing with postpartum depression too, which is a really tough subject for any guy to have to try to describe. So that's the minefield part that I was talking about in that text. But yeah, it's a serious thing, and it is very powerful, right? It has an effect. People can't understand until they've been through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very powerful thing, and it has a profound effect on your decision making.
Yeah.
And to imagine that, culturally, did Jacobin have it? I don't know. We don't know.
Right.
It's not mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Right. But when you figure in a culture where there's midwives, right, and there's a whole network of support around giving birth, the ritual of a young boy has been brought into the group, right? There's all this culture around that. Is there more support for that kind of a thing? Perhaps in a culture like that, maybe. I don't know. So that was interesting.
So yeah, so maybe it wouldn't have been possibly as prevalent because there's more support, more natural support, more support communally.
Yeah,
right?
A communal support system because everyone's home raising the army of children, right? So it's interesting. I don't know. Yeah. I would hope that that's true, but it's quite possible those things weren't really discussed.
Could be, yeah, and that that I think one of the things that I talked to Rob, of course, talked to Robin afterwards, and just curious as to what her experience was with the message, and the best way for me to describe the difference between Robin and I is I'm much more diplomatic, and she is much more bold. Yeah, she just so like in conversations and speaking, she just goes right for it, and she'll just say things that everyone else is thinking, and just because she's like, I don't have time to waste. I just want to say, and which I really appreciate about her. And she just so again, I hadn't I knew what she's speaking of, but I didn't have all the particular cues, and so she's like, yeah, I have postpartum depression, and which I obviously knew, but didn't know that she was going to bring it up. But again, and she talked about it later to me that she brought it up because she's like, this is unbelievably prevalent in people's lives.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about it. So she's like, I just wanted to bring it up to kind of give people, the ability to admit it, to say, yes, this is not just, this is not just something that happens, once in a while. This is something that happens all the time that we don't always, or actually more to the point, rarely talk about. So I appreciated that part of it because she was trying to balance how does she, share from the scriptures, but then also, the whole, the kind of, how do you speak to moms on Mother's Day, and I think that was, in her, our youngest now is 7. So it's been a while. But that stuff still lingers. So it's like, which is why I had her speak. Cause I'm like, it's a minefield. I'd rather have the professional speak, have the expert on being
exactly. Yeah. But that was good that she brought that up. It's a unpopular subject to speak about, I think, because it's uncomfortable. But I think nowadays more people are becoming more open about how it's affected them, and it's a really important thing to address.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and I know. I mean, this is a whole other field, I guess, or a whole other discussion. But just the concept of mental health in the church has not been, I don't think, and I'm not just talking about our church, but just generally in the church has been adequately discussed. I think, I actually recently I was in a just a discussion over a meal, I think, about mental health, and there was this just kind of like this kind of dismissal of actually dealing with mental health issues as mental health issues. It was kind of like, well, it's a trust issue or whatever. I'm like, well, no, that's not that's not the case. It's not, it's not, nor is anything usually that cut and dry, right? Mental health is very complex. And just like if I have high blood pressure, I'm going to go take medication for it. If I have mental health issues, which is chemicals in the brain, biological, you better believe I'm going to go take medication for it. So, it's okay if we have pain in our body, high blood pressure, so on, cholesterol, that's a non-issue. But when it comes down to mental health, for some reason, that's a demarcating line.
But then now you're getting into Western civilization history.
Well, right. Yeah.
How was medicine, and scientific method focused? It was focused on dealing with physical ailment, mental ailments, different problem, until you get to the concept of the humors.
Yeah.
And then, not in good humors, that kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
And psychology doesn't come along till later, right? So, and dismissed frequently as, in the early years. So, how people perceive to this day, right? Dealing with mental health issues is still a sticky subject.
Do you think so? Would you say are you saying it's more of a Western civilization problem, more so than just the church?
I think so.
Okay.
I think that people are becoming more comfortable openly speaking about it or dealing with and addressing issues. They're also quick to label things that may or may not be true. But I think that it's an important facet of who we all are, right? Yeah. If you're not having thoughts, something's not right. So we all think stuff, and how we perceive the world might affect how we feel about the world. Yeah. And Mr. Rogers is gone, but he left a legacy of dealing with your feelings. It, as goofy as that sounds, it's super important, and people forget. And you end up with a lot of folks in distress. It's a critical piece of healthcare.
Yeah.
As critical as, exercise and medicine, eating right, all that mess. You got to deal with what's in your head.
Just to your point, you're right. I mean, those things matter deeply. Like what we feel affects who we are. And if we don't manage that well, there could be distress, or depression or just anxiety, all those things. And you're right. There's corrections to either. Some of it comes out of just managing your life right. And then sometimes it comes into medication, and both are applicable, meaningful ways to kind of manage your own mental health. But it matters. And I don't think we've always talked about it. Again, I can only really speak to the church. I don't feel like we've always talked about it in the church abroad, the large, big church. Great. We've kind of dismissed it more than we've given it credence to, but you can't dismiss it. It's impossible to.
In the church where I grew up, there was a large group of folks who trained to be counselors in the church. And that was that counseling service was in frequent use. And I think really helpful for the times. Where that kind of perception of doing something like that has gone, I don't know. I haven't seen it as often anywhere else since the 80s, 70s, 80s. But it's interesting it's such an important piece, but people try to either hide it or disassociate from it.
Yeah, it's not a regular conversation. Yeah. Well, that went. I mean, again, no conclusions today, but that went deep and wide, I'll say. Yeah. That's something worthwhile bringing back up. I think you're right. I think that there was a push for, like, Stephen ministry was a ministry that they weren't called. Oh, it was.
Yeah,
they're still around.
I didn't want to label it just in case, but yeah. But now that you have,
I have not gone through that, but I've sent people to it, and I've always been. We actually were going to start a Stephen's ministry at a different church, but I've always been. And again, I don't know what it is now. This was 5 or 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was really helpful. It could still be now. I just don't know. But yeah, it's still, I believe it's still around, and I that concept's still around, but I don't know where it's gone or how prevalent it is in churches anymore. So either way, I do, my apologies. I do have to actually right now I have to go get to another
I
meeting.
also.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thanks for doing this again, and we'll pick it up and we'll see what we talk about, because who knows at this point.
So number 10 in the books.
Number 10 in the books. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, John. I'll talk to you later.
All right. See you later.